Given that AI can now generate concepts and layouts and mood boards and generate renders without a problem, this means that a tectonic shift, something very unusual, is happening in the interior design industry. It's that aesthetic designs, much of it is DIY now. Of course, execution isn't. In fact, it's getting harder. But regardless, this raises an important question. If two firms can create equally beautiful designs, then why does one firm consistently deliver those designs while the other ones struggles to execute those same designs? The answer is, of course, not in creativity, it's in execution. And before we deep dive into execution today, let's revisit something from 2 episodes ago. We spent an entire episode talking about client discovery and priority matrix and psychological needs. It's not because we enjoy paperwork or we enjoy seeing clients fill out forms. It's because the root of successful execution lies long before the first worker physically arrives on site. And when something goes wrong on site, that's when we find out whether discovery was just documentation or whether it had some value and whether it was risk management. And that's exactly what we're going to audit today. Let's audit your execution process. I'm going to give you a few scenarios. For each one, ask yourself a simple question. Could my team answer this immediately? Or would we need to start making phone calls and check our notes? And that's going to tell you a lot about the maturity of your operation. Here's the first thing to understand. Most firms think execution is when projects become difficult. No, execution is where operational weakness becomes apparent. It becomes visible at that point. The site does not create operational problems, it reveals them. It reveals discovery problems. It reveals weaknesses in designs. It reveals weaknesses in procurement, in communication, in accountability. Execution is when the bill of past mistakes comes due. So let's begin. Audit number one, vendor failure. Your material vendor calls. The stone that you've supplied is not going to arrive for another week. What happens next? Not theoretically. Actually, do you immediately know what's going to be affected? What activities will stop? What milestones will stop? What clients need to be informed? What backup vendors who are already approved in the same area can we go to prevent further delays from the original vendor? Or does everyone start to make phone calls trying to figure these details out? Because here's the reality, a 1 week vendor delay rarely becomes a 1 week project delay. It typically is much longer because contractor waits, installation waits, schedules move, other trades get impacted, approvals get pushed, and suddenly a 7-day problem becomes a 30-day problem. It's not because the vendor failed, it's because the dependency wasn't visible. If your team cannot answer these questions quickly, then you have identified an execution visibility problem. Audit number two, contractor dependency. What happens if a contractor falls sick during a critical phase of the execution? Can the contractor continue the work? Is the scope documented clearly? Are responsibilities defined? Is progress tracked? Or does the project stop because one individual holds all the knowledge? Many firms think that they're managing projects and project execution. In reality, you're depending on people, and dependencies create risks. So essentially, you're managing dependencies. Remember, systems scale, individuals don't scale. So if a temporary absence of one person can significantly slow down the workflow in the project, you've identified a resource dependency or a resource capacity problem. Audit number three, project manager capacity. Let's make it a little bit more challenging. There's one project manager, there are 3 sites. Each site is 3 hours away from the others. In most firms, this is not a hypothetical scenario. It's just Tuesday. It happens. Now ask yourself, are site visits being used to manage execution, or are they being used to discover things that should already be visible? Because those are two very different things. If a PM must physically visit a site to learn that the work is delayed, that the material is missing, that the quality standards are not being met, then the business has a visibility problem. The best execution systems don't eliminate site visits, they make site visits more effective. The PM arrives knowing where the risks are, not hoping to discover them, not managing change on site. Decisions have to be taken offline and information has to be available to them much before. If execution entirely depends on your physical presence on site, then scaling is going to become very difficult, and costly rework is going to be very frequent. Audit number four, client approvals. Now let's talk about a challenge that every design firm faces. The client disappears. He's busy. A decision is required. Work cannot proceed without approval. 5 days pass. What happens next? Who follows up? How often? Where is the approval status tracked? Can the team see it? Can leadership see it? Does everyone understand that the project is now waiting for client decision? And perhaps more importantly, when 6 months later client reaches out to you and says, "Hey, you delayed my project. Can you prove it otherwise?" Or is the evidence buried somewhere inside WhatsApp messages and email threads of five separate people? Because on first day, maybe the project manager reached out. Second day, maybe a designer reached out. Third day, maybe leadership reached out. How would you get the evidence across all of these people, especially if somebody has moved out already? Remember, mature firms don't rely on memory. They don't rely on WhatsApp chats. They rely on sources of truth. They rely on systems. They rely on records. If approvals, follow ups, responsibilities aren't visible, you've identified a process dependency risk, and a very critical one at that. Audit number five, change management. This might be the most important audit question of them all. What happens when reality refuses to follow the plan? Because it will. Site conditions will change. Clients will change their mind. Materials will become available suddenly. Costs will increase. Vendors will fail. Regulations might change. Every project changes. The question is not whether change happens, that will. The question is, how does your operation respond to change when it happens? If a specific material becomes unavailable, do you have any alternatives? Do you have any vendors identified, secondary vendors identified, who could fulfill the same material or a different material of a different grade, maybe? Or would you start working from scratch? If a site condition forces a redesign, is there a structured process for evaluating the impact? If a client requests a change, can you assess timeline and cost implications before committing? Or does every change trigger confusion, delays, urgent meetings, approvals? Because execution isn't the management of certainty, it's the management of uncertainty. You have to think again about what this audit is really trying to measure, right? When you ask these questions to your teams, none of the problems actually started on site. The vendor delay did not start on site. Contractor dependency did not start on site. The approval bottleneck did not start on site. The change management issues did not start on site, and the site simply revealed them. Execution does not create operational nightmares, operational problems, operational bottlenecks. It reveals the operational problems that earlier stages failed to solve, or the process is not sufficiently evolved enough to solve. Poor discovery is always going to create change requests. It's a given. Poor design and poor design approval are going to create clarifications and changes later as well. Poor procurement is going to create delays. Poor communication is going to create confusion. Execution is where all of these weaknesses become impossible to ignore, which is why the strongest firms, they don't view execution as a standalone phase. They view it as the outcome of everything that came before it. Don't look at execution as a problem to solve. Think of it as your competitive advantage. Let me return back to the first point at which we started. AI is making designs much easier to produce. And the trend is only accelerating. The firms that thrive over the next decade will not be the firms with the most beautiful presentations. They will be the firms with the strongest execution systems. The firms that continue delivery when vendors fail. The firms which deliver despite contractors suddenly becoming unavailable. The firms which will ensure work does not get impacted even if approvals stall, even if clients change their mind, even when supply chains break. Because clients don't ultimately judge a project based on how it was planned, they judge on delivery. Execution is not and never has been about following a plan. Execution has always been about delivering despite the fact that plan will inevitably change. Increasingly, that is becoming the most valuable competitive advantage a design firm can have. In the final episode of the Operational Audit series, we'll examine a stage many firms almost always completely ignore: support. But this is a very critical state because this often determines whether client become repeat clients and referral sources, or a one-time client who does not refer anybody else. If these audit questions exposed weaknesses in your operations, that's useful. If you felt uncomfortable, that's how it should be. Because most operational bottlenecks, they don't appear as dramatic failures. They begin as small visibility gaps, process dependencies, and founder workarounds, ad hoc workarounds that slowly over time build up and become part of our daily operations. In time, these small issues become delays, rework, margin erosion, and client frustration. That's why we've opened up a limited number of complimentary operational audit consultations. We'd like to walk through your current workflow, identify bottlenecks, uncover hidden dependencies, and show you where growth is stalling. You can request an audit or start a free 2-month trial for the Immaculate platform, your workflow management platform, at immaculate.co.in/trial. And if you've been following the operational audit series and find some value in it, please subscribe so you don't miss the final episode. Thank you.